The Mental Health Series is brought to you by Micro Gains and Dominion Strength. Both are longtime friends and sponsors of the Barbell Logic podcast, and neither hesitated for a second in wanting to sponsor a series that they know is incredibly important to so many people. Both companies are true small businesses, American-owned, and 100% of all their products are made here in the United States. You'll hear more about that later in the show. For the finest quality fractional plates, visit microgains.com. That's with a Z, microgains with a Z.com. And for the highest quality leather belts, go to dominionstrengthtraining.com. Both use discount code LOGIC for a significant discount off their products exclusively for Barbell Logic listeners.
Welcome to Barbell Logic. Rewind.
Have you guys heard about what's going on the new Bachelorette show?
I haven't.
Definitely have not heard what's going on in the new Bachelorette show.
You'll have to forgive me.
My wife has pulled me into this. So,
oh my goodness.
So there's this guy who talks about what's really going on in the Bachelor show, right? And so the guy who's won this, and this is like, he hasn't won yet, so the episodes haven't caught up to reality. But the guy that won is this like country singer, right? And it turns out that he, like the week before, was in the Bahamas with his girlfriend of like 4 months. And he goes on, to be a bachelor on the Bachelorette, basically to forward his career. That's what he told his girlfriend. And that's why she let him go on,
Oh, God.
And he ends up winning it. And so the ex-girlfriend, the girlfriend who is like in love with this guy, went to the Bahamas. She's on the podcast of this, like, I think Reality Steve is his name. And then she finds out that this guy was actually cheating on her with another girl. And the only reason that came out is because now this guy's, when he's,
he's famous.
Exes are basically coming out. And so, the truth is coming out. And so she's like brokenhearted about that as well. And so me and my wife are watching the show and watching this guy, and he's like super smooth, like super
dark triad.
No, I don't know dark triad, but he's like, he's very charming. He's very, he serenades her like at night, and, she's oblivious to that this guy's like, playing this game.
Right. Even though the whole thing is a game from top to bottom.
Right.
Yeah, but the point is that it's exposing what is probably a greater problem to everyday regular Joe America that just doesn't happen to be on a national television show and get exposed, right? This is far easier for people to play this game. And this guy gets exposed. He's setting up franchises, and he gets exposed because he's a celebrity now. Yeah, he's got franchises set up all over the United States.
We call that running traps around here.
You do?
Yeah.
It's like irons in the fire. So I thought you were going to come in and chew Scott's ass, but it feels like you're actually going to validate some of his claims. Is that true?
I've been thinking about this. I was actually Googling, like, hiring a private investigator for, your girlfriend or boyfriend to check them out. And there's this private investigator that wrote this article about what's happened in the aftermath of like 3,000 cases of doing this. And he said that usually someone hires a private investigator if they feel like the other person is lying,
right,
for some reason. And, there's basically two outcomes. One is they find out like, oh, their girlfriend is learning pole dancing to basically as like a big secret,
right,
or the boyfriend is going out with his guys and he just is like literally at a bar with his dudes. And he just doesn't tell his girlfriend where he's at because he's embarrassed that he's just spending all this time watching cricket,
Right.
And so the private investigator said, in those cases, if they tell the partner, it's usually not a huge deal. In the cases where they actually catch the partner in the lie, right, of the affair, of multiple affairs, the partner usually responds with anger. Sometimes it leads to, working through in the relationship and figuring it out. But usually, like, in all the patients that I've seen where they've caught the other partner in cheating and then they confront them, usually the partner either denies it or he reacts with anger or, often a very, very strong emotion. Like,
Of course.
how dare you look at my cell phone?
Sure.
And sure, you caught me texting someone and it's obvious we're doing like meetups and stuff, but how dare you break my privacy and look at the cell phone, and just absolute anger. And so I don't know, I have mixed feelings about when you're in a relationship and you think that your partner's lying, how do you deal with that sort of thing, especially if it's early on?
Well, yeah, I think that the way I would handle it is what drove me to recommend this to people over the years. If you're talking about getting married to someone and you think there's some crazy stuff up, or even if you don't, like I'm telling you, a lot of people, they met in a town that's not their hometown. They're not in their community. They date for 6, 8 months, a year, and then they get engaged. You really don't know that person. You really don't.
It's not just about affairs. Like, what if the person's got $80,000 in credit card
where's
debt?
the credit card debt?
What if they were sexually abused by Uncle Joe? And that doesn't come out until
the
later.
Gambling addiction.
And I was going to say, in Scott's defense, you specifically said, we don't confront it.
No,
you're just like,
I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm looking for stuff that disqualifies.
Yep.
And if I see a big deception, you're cheating on me. Like, I'm not going to have a confrontation about that.
Yep.
I was thinking about getting engaged. I was thinking about proposing marriage, and Dog the Bounty Hunter found out that you have another boyfriend. I'm not fixing that. Like, I'm not going to get into the marriage contract with that person. I'm out. So if they're like, oh, how dare you check? No, they're never going to know. I'm just going to be like, you know what? It's not you, it's me. Best of luck to you in all the future. Hasta mañana.
Yeah. No, I think that a couple of the complications in our society is, we're not longitudinally invested in a community as much as we used to be.
Right.
In the old days, you were in a small community, you had a group of people who knew you really well. And because of that, when you were looking to get married, you had a reputation based on how you lived your last, 20 years of your life. Nowadays, it's like there's so much movement in how people move around and so on and so forth. I'm curious, Scott, what were some of the messages that you got?
Oh, it's a bunch of stuff about defending people's sensibilities. Somebody would say, oh, this is a bridge too far for you to go behind your fiance's back. And I'm reading that. I'm like, this doesn't mean anything. What if that bridge is too far? Which bridge is good enough? Like, what are you talking about? And then behind their back, how about this? Don't go behind their back. Hey, babe, it's Friday night. Monday morning, I'm going to go meet with Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Mhm.
Is there anything you want to tell me? And by the way, here's $500 and you can do the check on me too. Like, you don't have to go behind their back. Maybe you do, but I mean, behind their back, what does that mean? Like, you're free to make inquiries. You're free to make inquiries, for Christ's sake. So most of the objections were like about the sensibilities. It's a sensibility. I offended their sensibility in perhaps doing that. The other objection was, well, what about prenups? Why wouldn't you recommend a prenup? And I have entire arguments against prenups, but the prenup is purely economical. The prenup doesn't change the fact that you may have married a crazy person. You've selected a crazy person for your child's parent. No prenup can fix the fact that their parent is nuts or that their parent had another family and you didn't even know about it. Like, there are women that marry a guy and he is married to somebody else in another state and has 3 other kids and he's a traveling salesman. Like, that happens. The prenup can't fix that. I'm not worried about the money. Money doesn't grow on trees, but they do print that shit. Like, the money's not the thing. It is one of the things, but it's not the thing. The thing is, did you pick a deceiver, a flawed, broken person to be one of your children's parents?
So I think this led in the prior conversation to something I've been working on, which is like making a list of the red flags in dating.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, number 1, when I think about this person, I already want to change them.
Yeah.
David, I don't want to change a thing about you.
I don't want to, that's very cut.
If there was one thing I could change about you, it would be
Where you live.
that you
I
lived
was gonna say
here
it's where you
rather
live.
than there.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who knows what will happen. So number 2, would I want to have my future children with this person? Or I think what Scott said to me on the phone call is, would you want this person to babysit your children if you had children?
Yeah.
Like, would you trust them enough with your children if you already had children?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually said that. That's how Matt and I actually started that conversation on episode 196 was, is this somebody that you would have babysit your kids? And like, even that is a pretty low standard. Babysitting is an evening while you go to the movies. We're really talking about a lifetime here, but even that's a pretty low standard.
Certainly it's a great leading question to go like,
Yeah.
is that, like, just sometimes there's people like that give you the heebie-jeebies a little bit. You can't put your finger on it. You're just like,
Well, there's the heebie-jeebies. And then there's also just like, I think he might lose his temper and like punch the kid.
Sure.
Or he's just so irresponsible, he might burn the house down. Like the kids
Right.
are going to be watching him. I mean, there are all different levels of don't want them to watch the kids,
And I would say, like, does this person have a history of violence? Do they have a history of domestic violence? I mean, one of the biggest predictors of future violence is prior violence.
Right.
Have you ever heard that story about Scott going off on that guy at the movie theater?
I wasn't violent.
No.
I'm just kidding. He did go off on the guy in the movie, but it wasn't violent.
I will yell at someone.
It was just vile.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, number 3. Could I see this person become a good father or mother? Or could I see this person being a good father or mother?
Yeah.
Of course.
Am I feeling a pull to rescue them in some way?
Oh,
Right?
Hold on. I want to go back to the one before that for a second. Like, we glass over the, can I see this person being a good father or mother? But I think it's important to realize that many, many, many people in their 20s and early 30s who are potentially looking for a mate, children are the last thing on their mind. Most of them think that they don't even want children. You're actually seeing this trend. People who are more secular, more educated, more educated, they tend to have less kids. And so they often go into this with like, I don't want kids. So like, why would I care if they're a good mom or dad? And yet we know biologically that most of those people will actually eventually get to a point where, I mean, we were like that. I was like that. Right? Like, I think I thought maybe there was a day, when I was 22 and I was already married, I thought, well, there'll probably be a day that we'll have kids. But I didn't really want kids. And then one day, something happened. I mean, and it was almost more biological.
do you want me to tell you what happened?
What happened?
Well, sometimes when a mommy and a daddy love each other very, very much,
Yeah.
it's we have the birds and the bees talk.
I mean, I wanted a kid. We weren't pregnant. Right.
Right.
So, but I'm just saying that I think a lot of times people go, well, like, who cares if they would make a good mother or father? Like, I'm not interested in having kids. Like, well, hold on. Right.
I think a lot of people that don't want to have kids and ultimately do not, who are married, who don't want to have kids and ultimately do not have kids, I think a lot of it is they really don't want to have kids with that other person. David made a face.
What do you think, Puder? Hold on. I saw a micro expression.
I did too.
Yeah.
I think it was a macro expression.
Was it a macro expression?
I know some people who I think care about their significant other very, very much and were willing to toss their lot in with that person. But when it all comes down to it, they're like, yeah, I don't want them to be the parent. I can't do it with this person. And they don't.
I've had a couple patients like that where they get into the relationship and they're like, oh my, I can't see myself having kids with this person,
Mhm.
And it's like whenever there's a divorce, I'm always like, okay, is there going to be a child custody battle? Because that just makes it so freaking hard.
Yep.
Like, I think that's probably one of the hardest things that any person has to go through because it's chronic, ongoing stress, unless there's a good relationship, right? Which is why I did an episode on forgiveness. It's like, man, you got to forgive your ex, and like at least psychologically be grounded, not in anger all day towards that ex.
And this is the problem with the prenup. The prenup doesn't do anything about or for the custody battle that might be coming. And even if you've got a good relationship with the ex, David, and even if you forgive them, you still end up having some step parent in your child's life that you had no say about, right?
Yeah.
The kids are too important. So marriage isn't about you, in my opinion. Marriage is about the kids or the potential kids. Make no mistake. When you think, I'm going to propose to Susan, it's not about you getting married. It's about picking a parent for your child. We talk about all the time, like, oh, if you want your vertical leap to go up, get better parents. You've got a chance here to get your kid a better parent. Don't it up.
Well, and it often becomes even greater than that single generation. Like we see this all the time. Broken grandparents, broken great-grandparents lead to broken grandparents, which lead to broken parents, which lead to broken kids. And it's just this, it can start this like generational cycle if you're not really careful about what, you see this all the time. You see this with abuse, you see this with addiction, you see this like this thing happens and that leads to and then the next generation are abusers or addicts and the next generation are, and that's just one example. I mean, it could be any of those things, but this is weighty stuff.
Yeah. And even if you don't think that you want to have kids and you're like, oh, Hambrick, my marriage won't be about that. You might. And another thing is you might end up being the kid. You might fall and hit your head and be impaired for the rest of your days. And then this person is your caregiver.
Yeah.
It's much bigger than like, oh, they leave the toilet seat up and they've got this foible and that foible. And can I deal with it? It's more than that. Go, David.
I was going to say, I've met a lot of single people who say, yeah, they don't want to have kids. And then, as I continue to treat them and they get healing for different traumas, all of a sudden they're like, I think I do want to have kids. So sometimes, I'm not saying it happens all the time that the only reason people don't want to have kids is some sort of trauma, but I've seen that a number of times be the case where it's like once they psychologically develop, all of a sudden they're in a very different headspace. They want to be married. They want to have kids. Whereas like 5 years before, they had no desire for that.
Yeah, mitigating some of this trauma can do it, like you said. But we also know the story about the biological clock. Time goes on and we feel those pressures and you decide that you want to have kids where you didn't want to have kids when you were 23, which is a mistake.
Yeah.
But you change.
Okay, so let's go back to number 4. So what was number 4 again?
Just number 4. Am I feeling a pull to rescue them in some way? Let me just say, there are a lot of people who, when they are raised in a family, they become the caretaker of their family. They become the therapist of the family for whatever reason. Mother and father are chaotic. There's a divorce going on. They become the peacekeeper, whatever. So they develop this role of like the caretaker from a very young age. And then they get pulled into relationships where this is exactly the same pattern.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think you need to find an equal. I think it's very risky. If you feel compassion towards someone, then you should be compassionate, but maybe not their dating partner,
Right.
Yeah, we've talked about that with our kiddos.
Right, because the truth is, we're probably not equipped to fix them anyway.
Yeah, you can't, right?
I mean,
that's not your life project. You're trying to find a partner, not a fixer-upper, and then you're not equipped for it anyway. You can't do it.
Yeah, once you're in an attachment relationship, it's so hard to help someone else grow.
Yeah.
You can't even coach your spouse, like with barbells.
But don't you think that people are often attracted to that potential even from the very beginning, right? Like they see sort of, like they're attracted to damage. This person's damaged. I've got sort of superhero or savior complex. I want to go in and fix them. I want to save them. I want to rescue them. You're using number 4 as this example. Like that's a massive red flag. But I think for a lot of people, that's exactly what they're attracted to.
Yeah, I would say that person probably needs to do some work on themselves, right? If that's all they're attracted to, if that's what their pattern of relationships is, do some work on yourself, man.
Yeah, we should be attracted to their virtues, not their shortcomings. But, there's a theory out there, David, that, people tend to select mates to try to gain an opportunity to repair a problem from their past. Right. My dad was neglectful, and then they end up being attracted to dudes who are neglectful.
It's called people have patterns from their past and traumatic sort of needs from their past, right? And so they're trying to find situations that are similar enough that then they can create a different outcome so that they can heal.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's why they're looking for that corrective emotional experience. The problem is that in a relationship, it's actually very hard for that to happen, So in therapy, it's like, man, pay for a good therapist if that's what's going on. If you're attracted to a certain type of person that's destructive, that's a copy of your parents in a bad way, like see if you can get some of that stuff figured out outside of a relationship.
Yeah. My experience too is, I don't know that you work the same way, but that takes some time. When I first started going to therapy, my psychologist, she was interested in the past, but we didn't deal with it right away. We're like, hey, listen, you got some self-destructive behaviors that are going on right now, today, in the present, and we need to change the behavior. And it's going to take some time to figure out like the underlying stuff, right? So I had this idea of the first time you ever go to therapy, I'm going to lay on the couch and I'm going to talk about my childhood. And that, like, one, I never laid on a couch. And two, I didn't talk about my childhood for like 10 months. And I think part of it was, I think I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think it was, she can't change what happened to me when I was 5. I mean, I didn't have any abuse or anything. It wasn't anything like that. But we can change what I'm doing today. Like, there's some self-destructive behavior that's going on today that needs to be changed as quickly as possible. And as the layers, like an onion, comes out, we can sort of get down to that, but that's going to take some time.
It takes a lot of time.
Everything's material, though.
Have you ever noticed that the smallest weight plates you can find at a gym is 2.5 pounds? You know, one of the things that everyone needs when they're first starting out on their journey of strength is fractional plates. That's plates smaller than 2.5 pounds, so that you can continue to get wins in the gym every single session for as long as possible by adding strength and muscle 1 pound at a time. Mike from microgains.com is a true American-owned small business. All of his fractional plates are super high quality, and all of them are made in Pennsylvania and shipped by the owner himself. So when you support Microgains, you support a real blue-collar American trying to survive and support his family in the midst of a pandemic. There are definitely other fractional plates out there, but none with a story like Mike's. I've used them all, but I use his fractional plates and dumbbell fractional plates literally every single workout. And I'm thankful to have a company of Microgains quality as a supporter of the podcast. For the finest fractional plates on the planet, head over to microgains.com and use discount code LOGIC for 10% off any order. That's microgainz.com and use discount code LOGIC for 10% off any order.
I've been seeing this one client for like 5 years. And the first couple years, I didn't even really get reality a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
The person has a pattern of joining the aggressor, which comes from, being traumatized by her father, basically. And it's interesting, as I'm saying this, I know I could be saying this about 50 or 100 people that I've treated, right? And it's only been recently that she's been able to feel anger towards her father and towards men who are the aggressor. Before, she just sided with the most powerful person, right? And so it's like only through attachment and through the connection that we've had and the trust that we've built that she's been able to feel some of the anger a little bit towards me and then subsequently towards other people. So that transference and that coming out, it takes a while. Now, if you're a single person who's like, I got some of these issues, I would say at least spend a year and get someone who's the best of the best that you can get and invest some money in it. But most people aren't thinking like that.
Yep.
They're just not seeing how that could be of value in perpetuity for the next 40 years of their life,
Money's so well spent.
Can you spend better money? That's probably the best money you can spend.
So one example for me is like, I learned how to appease people with narcissistic traits. And I found myself in my adult life, like in my 20s, finding a series of these people that I would make really, really happy. And I was good at it, right? But then as I've gone through therapy, I realized like I can turn this on or not turn it on, And I can see when I'm starting to see that I have a pull towards someone with strong narcissism, and I can decide, they're not really for me. This person's all about themselves, their own agenda. And I would just be basically a means to that agenda, right? But it's taken like a long time to get to that place where I can then, one, notice it consciously, and two, be able to not fall into it.
Why do you think you were attracted to that type of person?
Because it was adaptive for me early on to be able to appease someone who is narcissistic.
Okay.
Yeah, we learn what love and affection looks like when we're little with certain types of people. And then that's what love and affection looks like from there on. That's my theory. Unless you perhaps maybe you relearn what that can be and what that can look like. Right? That's what intimacy is. Like if you're a child of an alcoholic, I mean, that's the kind of person you're intimate with. I mean, it just sets your baseline for everything, But attraction is so complex. When we see someone and we're attracted to them, there's a whole aggregate attraction score you're giving them. It's not just their appearance, it's the way they move, the way you interact with them. It's a whole bunch of stuff.
Sure.
And there's so much stuff that we're carrying around that can feed or fuel or influence that attraction that we feel, that we probably shouldn't trust it. That's where my comment about, hey, hire a detective. When you're in those early months or maybe even the early years of that relationship, you're not seeing it like you would otherwise. If your friend will date somebody, you're like, good Lord, when she's a mess. Her house is not that she's not untidy. Her house is gross. She doesn't even have a dad. And every time I see her, she drinks and falls down. Like she's a binge drinker. Every time I've seen her.
I feel like Scott's talking about an actual human here.
Well, I mean, I'm not actually,
No,
but I mean,
just
we
use an
all
example.
know these stories. You're like,
Yeah,
good
sure.
Lord, her house, I mean, she has roaches. And then every time I go see her at a dinner party, she drinks 2.5 bottles of wine and like chips a tooth. And you're like, God, Steve can't see it. Well, you can.
Right.
Well, Steve's not dumb. And you're Steve when you're in your deal. So it's great, when you got this community, the detective's the last thing you do. You ask your people first, like, what do you think of Susan?
I showed this list to someone from my Instagram, and one of her comments was that be wary of the person that doesn't want to meet your friend group or your family until much later into the relationship. And this person said, look, it's going to open you up to not having that early feedback from your people.
What about the other way around? What about the person that doesn't want you to meet their friend group or family? Right? Same thing.
Not necessarily. What if their dad's a drunk?
Well, and so I was going to ask, is that because Scott, you and I talked about this. I can't remember if we talked about it on the podcast or just privately, that my daughter is 14. We are very much into, hey, we become friends with people. You're 14 years old. You don't need, you're 14. You're not ready for a relationship. That doesn't mean that attraction isn't something that naturally occurs. It does naturally occur. It's okay to be attracted, but let's become friends with this person first. And then we start to kind of walk through with our own kids. Like, what are the things that are sort of major qualifications or disqualifications for a future potential mate? And the question is, like, do we marry people with crazy families? And I think you got to be really careful here because everybody has people in their family that, right? So, but like, where do you draw the line? And we don't want to create a standard that no one can meet. That's not what we're trying to do. But, if dad is still part of the family and is addicted to black tar heroin, that may not totally disqualify the person. But I think that's a red flag of, man, this person's going to be in my life for the rest of my life.
When I look at that, I would look at, does this person have other mentors that they've picked up in their life that are strong, meaningful relationships? Because that's what I see a lot of the times. If a person grows up in a chaotic family like that, they'll often find organizations or situations where they can be mentored and fathered or mothered by a community. And that's really important. For me, dysfunctional families aren't maybe a deal breaker, but it's like, how much do they want to be connected to that dysfunctional family, and how oblivious are they to the dysfunction of the family?
Yeah.
Like if you're dating someone who still is highly connected to that heroin addict and
doesn't realize it's
that
dysfunctional.
Person, and, will listen to them above you, that's the red flag. Okay. Number 5, I'm overly focusing on positive things about them, maybe one positive thing, and not seeing all the other parts of them.
This is normal for the first 6 months though, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would say it's like,
that's the puppy love stage.
That's like what everyone goes through with love. It's like they become blinded to the faults of their partner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is a good piece of wisdom there. One of the things we've talked about before is we don't get married to that person. We don't get engaged to that person until that stage has passed. Like everybody recognizes in the beginning.
Don't get married to them until you're tired of them.
Well, but you have to be able to see. So, I'm going to get, I don't mean this in a cheesy sort of way, but in the beginning, you're just like, I remember when Rachel and I first started dating, like she could do no wrong. She was perfect. And that's not real love. That's a step moving that direction, right? You've got this puppy love, this sort of like, it's infatuation on some level, and there can't really be a true depth to that love. And until you can actually see them warts and all, and then choose to still love them. Like in fact, I love you in spite of these things, and also because of these wonderful things. Then you start to build some depth there. Now, now Rachel and I have been together for 22 years, and we know all the good and all the bad about each other and wouldn't trade each other for the world. But there's a red flag for me when somebody starts dating. We actually see this a lot in church, in our church group, of people who like they've never really even had a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they start dating somebody and they're engaged in like 3.5 months and they're married at 6 months. And you go, ooh, like and maybe they've known each other for a long time and maybe they're friends. So maybe, they grew up together. Some of these like things from the past that Scott's talking about, we don't have a need to hire a private investigator or anything, but they're still in puppy love stage. And then they have to go through this person has problems post-marriage, post-wedding. Those are things that need to be worked out pre-wedding, right?
But you can't work everything out.
No, you can't. But I mean, if you're still in this person's perfect and has no problems, and you marry him that's, I don't know. I'm not the psychiatrist here, but I could remember going through this with my own wife. And we dated for 4 years before we got married. And that was the right amount of time for me, because that first year was it was bliss. There were no challenges that we had to work through for that first year. And then we had to work through some challenges before we got married. So then when we got married, we had already had some track record of, okay, like we know what it's like we had been through premarital counseling and some of those things. And so, I don't know.
Milton agrees.
Yeah. Milton does.
Milton the cat. Yeah, he agrees.
Does that make sense, Peter, what I'm saying? Like
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just something to be aware of, especially like if your guy friends are like, dude, you're not seeing, this. You're not seeing what we're seeing. And then, what will happen sometimes is you'll pull away from your guy friends or you'll pull away from your girlfriends who are like, dude, what are you thinking? Like, do you not see like what's going on here? And you're like, okay, I guess we can't be friends anymore. It's like, I can't,
That brings up something very interesting. You need to probably be the kind of person that can have good friends before you even consider getting married. If you just got a bunch of beer drinking buddies and there's no depth there, and they're just going to say, hey, we don't like her because you didn't watch the game with us every Saturday now, you're probably not ready to be married anyway. You need to have some decent friends and be able to have had those kind of relationships. One, so they can give you some feedback and help you check your math. And two, so you can just be the kind of person that can have meaningful relationships. David, we've talked on the show before about people don't even have friends anymore. Like, if you don't have friends, how the hell are you going to be married? Not that your spouse ends up being like a friend. There is a friendship aspect, but it's something quite different, right? There is a collegiality and a friendship thing that happens inside of marriage, but it's not like your guy friends. It's not the same thing.
I tell my guy friends who are moving somewhere or something, I'm like, before you even start to think about dating, build some friendships.
Yeah.
Find a community. Don't be a lone wolf.
Right.
I think there's something a little alluring about going to a new city and just kind of being, alone, right? But at the same time, it's like, find some people with some commonalities, find a community, get plugged in.
Yeah.
Okay, number 6, does this person try to control everything about them, including me? It's just a red flag, right? These are not all deal breakers, but if they're positive to all of these things, then I would raise some discussion at least. Does this person react to obstacles with anger, rage, blame, and shaming others?
Yep.
Yeah. Major red flag.
Does this person blame others for their mistakes, where they are in life, or the problems they face? This is a big one, because like if their narrative is completely cohesively, I'm a
victim mentality.
I'm a victim. I got fired from my 10th job in the last year because my horrible boss, and I just can't get a break with a good boss. And, it's like at some point you're like, okay, what responsibility do you bear? And you have to realize if your partner can take no responsibility for their choices for their life, then when you get into an argument with them, it will be completely your responsibility.
That's good.
Yeah, and you're behind the 8 ball there. There's nowhere to negotiate from. There's no way to reconcile. It's just all your fault, interaction with somebody like that.
And some people like have no ego strength to be able to receive feedback.
Mm.
They don't have the ability to see their own mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a major piece for us. Rachel and I had to work through how to conflict well in marriage. Like our friendship was great, but the conflict was tough. And to do that in a way where the ultimate goal was not to win, but to reconcile was really important for us to see. It doesn't matter who wins the argument. The goal is reconciliation there. And so that took some work for us, for sure.
Does this person make impulsive decisions with their choices, money, emotions? Does this person shut down, disengage, stonewall, go numb, emotionally distant themselves when stresses occur, like arguments?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do this, but it's like if there's a very, very strong pattern, it can be really hard to have conflict with someone who just stonewalls or disengages or detaches completely, goes numb.
Yeah, that reconciliation becomes impossible if someone does any of these last three things that you've mentioned.
Oh, here's a good one. Does this person still have emotional energy tied to past relationships?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they over everybody? Are you the beta picking up all the pieces? Paying the bills?
And emotional energy could be anger as well.
Sure.
Like how much of their emotional day is spent having negative emotions towards their exes as well, right?
And that's a problem because in the present, you'll pay for the sins of the ex. Is that one of the major, or is it just a bandwidth issue often?
I think, these are not deal breakers, right?
Sure.
These are just things to like raise your red flag of like, oh, is this a bigger issue? I mean, like if the person has a ton of anger towards their ex, anger can become jealousy pretty quickly. And jealousy is a mixture of anger and love. And so, there's risk for you to be in a relationship where your emotional energy is all, tied up in this new relationship and their emotional energy is still tied up in their old relationships. But what I wanted to end on is the good signs, the good things on the list, right? So like this person has close friends and meaningful, trusting relationships with their friends.
That's a big good one.
Yeah.
This person has integrity in how they deal with people, money, and their work.
But how do you know that without the private investigator? No, I'm serious. How do you know if they have integrity with their money?
Yeah. So here's the thing we haven't talked about, David. There are people who are deceptive, right? There are people who are just, is it sociopathy?
It's like, so how do you find if someone's a primary psychopath, severe self-destructive person, right? And sometimes they can put on a social veneer for a long time.
There are extraordinarily charming psychopaths out there who can deceive you, particularly if you don't have experience with that and you don't have training. And then there are people out there that have borderline personality disorder. And when you're on the good side, it's euphoric, it's effusive, it's wonderful. And then when it goes bad, it is super, mega, ultra, terribly bad. And they are out there. And when you're in the throes of this, those initial stages of attraction, which could last 2 years, maybe even, I think you'd be oblivious to it, right? That's where you need your buddies to look in. But tell people about how scary these damn people are, David. They need to know they're out there. Like if you're from a good family, you don't know that there is grave darkness there.
And that's something that's real, right? So I think, okay, one thing we're talking about is the primary psychopath, which I think that people with primary psychopathy can be prosocial. And I talk about that in my podcast. The prosocial primary psychopath has morals and they live according to standards. They may not have affective empathy, so they don't feel into someone else's experience, but they've decided due to a series of beliefs to live life in a way to benefit society. So there are those people, bomb diffusers, people with very little fear of doing very scary things. There are those people, right? So we shouldn't just judge a whole group of people who may not, on the bell curve of affective empathy, be very, very high, right?
Sure.
Right.
The other group that we talked about is people with borderline personality disorder. So I would say, are they in the midst of needing treatment or are they someone who has received very good treatment, right? This is very different stages.
Are people with borderline personality disorder in general actually treatable?
Yes, 100%. Mentalization-based therapy, after they follow these people for 5 years, after receiving this type of therapy for a good year, or 2 years, and then support groups after, 80% of them no longer met criteria for borderline personality disorder. They no longer had self-harm. They no longer, suffered from a lot of the stuff that they were suffering from. So I hate to stigmatize a group of people. When you're dating someone, you have to have a little bit of a judging hat, right?
You have to. It's your life.
You decide like, okay, I'm no longer going to judge this person. I'm going to accept them. I'm going to marry them. I'm going to accept them for all their faults, and we're just going to grow together, right? But I would say, on what level of chaos is this person living, right? And so I'm hesitant to just characterize or label, because it's going on right now. One of the big things, is this guy a narcissist? Is this girl a narcissist? And you have some person on YouTube telling you how to diagnose these things. And it's actually a lot more complex, right? And so they're diagnosing someone who's a narcissist who actually has good connection with their friends, good connection with their families, very longitudinal relationships. That person's not usually a narcissist.
Good boundaries looks like narcissism to some people.
And once someone decides that their spouse or partner is a narcissist, it's like almost impossible to break that narrative.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in relationships. They'll come in and they'll say, my spouse is a narcissist. Tell them they're a narcissist. And I'm like, well, is that from your opinion or is that from a professional opinion?
Sure.
They're like, it's from my opinion, but I need your professional opinion to co-author them. And the more I get to know the situation, it's like, the person who's labeling the other person is using that label to defend against they have no wrong in their life. They have no errors. The other partner is the one with all the errors, right? And it's always a mix, right? So if you're only looking at the other person and judging the other person, then you're not looking at yourself. So, as we go through this list, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, that puts me in a place of judgment towards someone else. Yeah, that could be good, but you should also look at your own self and look at how to improve your own life.
Which I just asked you to do, and you said you've never looked at the list for yourself.
I'm
just giving you a hard time.
Matt, I could go through the list.
No, it's good. I was thinking about this even before you addressed it just now, but I think it's important to note that all of us are bent in the directions towards some of these things. And so when you talk about like what the magnitude of chaos is for this thing, right? Like as you read through that list, I go, ooh, like I'm bent towards that. But I've also had 6 years of counseling that sort of worked through that. And so I think it's probably important to note that just because someone is bent this way, that doesn't necessarily disqualify them as a future potential mate, especially if they've recognized that that is a thing and they've received help for that thing and they're not in the middle of the chaos of that thing. Is that fair?
Yeah, there aren't perfect people.
No, of course not.
We're all flawed. But
actually, we're all depraved, Scott. In fact,
if you've got deal breakers, and you should, damn it, you need to be willing to break the deal when you observe that deal breaker.
Yeah.
Right. And you probably need to be looking for it. When I look at business deals, I'm always like, I'm looking for a reason to head for the exit. I'm not looking for a reason to do the deal. I'm looking for a reason to leave because it's easy to fall in love with the idea of, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make money. I'm always looking for a reason to leave. And I think you probably should be when you're dating to an extent. But then once you're married, then it's the unconditional thing, right?
Yeah, we're in. Yeah.
You've looked, you're like, this is adequate. I value this person for these reasons. I value the relationship for these reasons. And then once you're married, you're in. And now you've gone into it with your eyes open and you've had all the data in front of you. You made a rational decision as so far as we can. And now you're committed. And now you do the thing until one of you throws dirt on the other one.
I think so how someone responds to feedback is so important. So, do you feel safe giving feedback to this person? Like, how do they respond to that? Do they respond with complete anger, denial, blaming, right? Or can they actually take a little bit of that, think through it? How do they grow? What is their history with growth when they hit tough patches?
And we all react to somebody gives you some feedback. But, the next day, are they like, hey, man, I overreacted there. I thought about that. You're right. This show's too good, but I've got an out. I'm going to have to leave.
Oh, you got to go. You got clients to train or something?
I got to go.
Okay.
Can we do another part or should I just leave you guys?
Can we wrap it up in like 2 minutes and then we'll do like a part 2 later on this?
David has like 14 more things to cover on his list.
Yeah, let's just do a 2-part series then. Let's wrap this part up and then we'll
Sounds good.
Puder, you want to like put a little like bow on it, and then Scott, you can do a sign off, and then we'll
All right.
continue this like, in another week after the show, whatever.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, what is the purpose of this, right? And we're talking about the purpose is forming a relationship which will lead to thriving in your life. And not all relationships lead to thriving, right? I think it's really hard early on in a relationship to see some of these blind spots. And so I think that's where the community, your friends, your family becomes so important. And I think largely in our culture, we've sort of pushed away from that. So we're kind of trying to maybe pull it back towards like, hey, how do we bring in some other sort of people who maybe are a little bit more objective, who are seeing this thing a little bit more clearly and seeing if we have blind spots, just like in our own life, right? So when I meet with my accountability partners, my mentors, where are my blind spots? What am I not seeing that I don't know? Not knowing what we don't know is where we get into trouble. As a physician, that's where I get into trouble. If I don't know what I don't know, right? That's when I can make a mistake. And then it's like, I don't even know that I've made the mistake, So I think more than anything, this discussion is kind of like, how do we accurately assess reality, truth, right? In prior episodes, we talked about connection, right? And connection is beautiful. We want to have that. But we also want to have an aspect of truth that we bring into how we see the world, how we see ourselves, how we see other people. The big point that I'm taking away is we don't want to go into a relationship blind, and we don't want to miss what we may not know that we don't know.
The unknown unknowns.
It's good. Let's keep talking about this. Let's do a part 2
Those are scary.
on it.
Should I put up the list at all, or should we save the list?
Yeah.
I'll put it up in my resource library, this handout.
Yeah, and shoot us an email, and we'll put it on the show notes for sure. We'll post it when we do it for sure.
We'll do that as well. Yeah, that sounds good.
Dr. Puder, thank you so much for giving us some of your valuable time and insights. Can't thank you enough. It really means a lot to me, and I hope it means as much to the people that listen as it does to me. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you next week.